Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. Today it's time to have a look at the suggestions passed to developers for June 2020 and once again have a look at the naval portion. This time a ton of massive ships got passed to the developers, showing that the trend of larger and larger machines is probably coming in naval forces. Remember, last year in December there was an interview given by Gaijin saying that there will be larger ships in game, including battle cruisers in 2020, so we'll have to see in the second half of the year if we're going to see some. Now, let's get on to the first machine. This is from Admiral Aruan, and what is this? Well, this machine here is one of the largest heavy cruisers, if you want to call it that there is. This is the USS Alaska that we're going to be talking about, and also the USS Guam. These are both in what is known as the Alaska class. Now, the Alaska class is a class of supercruisers. Now, why haven't you maybe heard of supercruisers before? Well, it's another term that Americans have made up to try and fit stuff into a class where they don't really belong. Now, this is one of the problems that I've had quite a lot of the times when it comes to reading about the history of naval. What you'll find is there will be slight differences between vehicles, and they will be labeled stuff which make it so they are their own individual class, so their own individual, designation, all of this, and it just makes it super complicated. And that is exactly the same thing as this vehicle, and how this vehicle, well, these vehicles that are being asked for worked. You have, as I said, the USS Alaska, which is the one you see here, and then you have the USS Guam, which is the one here. Now, let's have a chat about these. Where do these ideas come from? Well, first of all, the idea of a supercruiser is a complete American idea. Just kind of like how Germany has the pocket battleship, the Americans have a supercruiser. And what is a supercruiser? Well, a supercruiser is basically a heavy cruiser which is doubled in scale. So it's a big boy. It's one of the largest ones that has existed when it comes to its general scale of cruiser, but for some reason it's not a battle cruiser, it's not a battleship or a fast battleship, because they weren't considered capital ships, so therefore they're not them. Do you see why this is really annoying to go through? By the way, thank you for the article, Admiral Aruan. But the fact is, it's one of those crazy designations that is given to these things. So we're just gonna have to, we're just gonna have to deal with this. The Alaska class was built to hard counter the Deutschland class, which of course we have in game in the form of the Grafspee. And it was later a response to the Scharnhorst-class battleships, and also rumors of a new Japanese battle cruiser as well. So do you see how it was designed to counter battle cruisers, battleships, and all of this stuff, but because it wasn't considered a capital ship, instead we've got to call it a supercruiser instead. One of the things as well, post-World War II, in 1946 and 1950, when they were reorganizing everything, my god, trying to look at that history from a military point of view, especially when we talk about a ground point of view, is just all over the place. Because there's so many different designation changes, there's so many different specifications and all that, it's all over the place, but yeah, it is how it is. If you want to know generally when it comes to this USS Alaska and USS Guam, what you are getting on it, you are getting just a heavy cruiser scaled by 2. And basically, when you have a look at it, it is based off the Baltimore class heavy cruiser and just made bigger. So the Baltimore class, its displacement when it was in a full load was 17,000 long tons. When the Alaska class displacement was fully loaded, it was 34,000 tons. So it's literally just a ×2 heavy cruiser. And on top of this as well, it's another thing that doesn't make it a battle cruiser or a battleship for some reason, it didn't have a proper torpedo belt. For some reason, that is something that is seen as something that a battleship and a battlecruiser needs. As I said, it's all over the place. But anyway, the armor on this machine, it has a 9-inch belt, which thins to 5 inches on the sides. It has also more armor around its turrets. And its main deck is 4 inches with a splinter deck of 0.625 inches as well. When we have a look at the armament of this thing, it has battleship armament, but remember, it's a supercruiser. It has 3 triple sets of 12-inch guns, so that's 305mm Mark 8s, and these cannons were only seen on the Alaska class. They were seen as a massive improvement of the Mark 7s from the USS Wyoming. If you want to know, yes, the USS Wyoming is a battleship. God damn it. But yeah, so it has huge cannons. It has 6 dual-mounted 5 inches, which were dual-purpose, so there'll be AA and also AS. Then you have 14 quad-mounted Bofors. You had 38 single 20s, 2 catapults for launching 4 aircraft. So yeah, this thing is basically the standard of what a battleship would have, or maybe a battle cruiser, depending on who you're talking about. But don't worry, it's a super cruiser for some reason. Anyway, on to the next one. This is from Solzhenitsyn, and this is, of course, the Scharnhorst. And what we're talking about here is not just the Scharnhorst, which was a ship in itself. We're talking about the Scharnhorst-class in general. There were 2 ships of the Scharnhorst-class that are very well known, the Scharnhorst, and then of course the Gneisenau. The Gneisenau is probably more well known because it actually survived the war. It was scrapped in 1951, but the Scharnhorst was actually sunk in 1943, showing that it wasn't able to survive. So in introduction to these by Solzhenitsyn, he basically talks about how these were a direct response to the French Navy, specifically the battleship the Dunkirk, and 2 ships of the Scharnhorst-class were eventually built, which I just talked about, and they were the only German battleships built that had main cannons arranged in a triple tower setting, and they had participations across several operations in the Atlantic, attacking stuff such as British merchant ships, and also participated in Operation Weserübung, which was the code name given to the German invasion of Denmark and Norway. So the story starts for these 2 machines after the end of the First World War and also the signing of the 1919 Treaty of Versailles. Germany was limited in the construction of new ships for the Navy. We've talked about this many times when it comes to the Treaty of Versailles and then later on the Washington Treaty, that there was just a bunch of stuff going on, meaning that a lot of nations were limited, but mainly Germany, especially after the First World War. This agreement actually prohibited Germany from building warships with a displacement more than 10,000 tons, and in the early 30s, the aim of the German fleet was to replace the 6 obsolete pre-dreadnought battleships permitted by the Treaty of Versailles with new ships. So this would disregard, obviously, the Treaty of Versailles. The French and the Soviet shipbuilding programs of the 30s made German politicians think about building warships that exceeded the limits of the Versailles restrictions, and the Panzerschiff that were built in Germany at the time, which were later reclassified to heavy cruisers of the Deutschland class, were inferior to the new French design of the Dunkirk class battleships. So this surpassed the Germans' ships at speed, going at 30 knots. They had large guns, 330mm, and armor as well of 220mm and more. And in connection with information about the new French ship project in Germany, it was decided to design a ship capable of effectively resisting new Dunkirk-class ships. Now, what has to be understood is that at the time, Germany saw France as its main competitor around the area, especially when it came to naval. And also, it has to be said, the French were the main driving force behind the Treaty of Versailles being very aggressive towards Germany. And I think this definitely led a lot of aggression the other way as well, especially on the 30s and onwards. So in early 1933, when Hitler actually came to power in Germany, he immediately made it clear that he considered France the main opponent in shipbuilding and also in a bunch of other things as well. So the development of construction of 2 warships were given the get-go, and an improved type of Deutschland-class with enhanced armor, a displacement of not more than 19,000 tons, and 283mm triple towers was going to be built. These ships received a letter designation, D, which was later renamed to Scharnhorst, and E, later renamed to, of course, the Gneisenau. And during the year, there was a bunch of discussions on the design of these battleships, and this generated 3 separate projects. So there was one which was 18,000 with 6 280s, there was one which was 22,000 with 6 280s, and one which was 26,000 tons with 6 330 guns, so try and match, of course, the Dunkirk. And in the second half of 33, it was decided to order 2 new ships with the displacement of 19,000 tons with the 6 283s, and they would then declare them as 10,000 tons and just say they were within the limits, because of course, there was a lot of lies going on. And it was decided to take all measures to conceal the information about the displacement of the ships, so they weren't shown that they were breaking the Versailles Treaty. And in the end of 1933, Admiral Erich Raeder believed that ships should carry weapons of caliber 305mm, but the armaments department believed that the designs and manufacture of the new towers would be very critical in terms of time and could delay development by another 4 years, so the ships received 283mm cannons. So these new warships, the D and the E, they were ordered in 1934, early 1934, and by the state shipyard in Wilhelmshaven. But Admiral Raeder was not satisfied with the designs of the new ships, and in the middle of 1934, he managed to convince Hitler to stop the construction of the new ships and increase the displacement of the ships to 26,000 tons for the installation of a 3rd main caliber tower. And at the beginning of 35, Scharnhorst and Gneisenau were reordered, and in the middle of the same year, they were deposited at the Kriegsmarinewerft shipyards in Wilhelmshaven and Deutsch Werking-Kiel, respectively. And then during the construction of the ships, it was clear that the displacement would significantly exceed the 26,000-ton project. And then the Scharnhorst was launched in 36 and entered service in 39. The Gneisenau was launched in 36 and once again entered service in 1938. And they had a long service history. I'm not going to go through it too much here. Let's just basically say, if you want to read about it, it is kind of interesting what their whole history is. But generally, it's they fought in the Atlantic. They did really well. They shot a lot of ships, which were mainly trading vessels. Then, if we have a look at its general armament, so as built, it had 9 280mm guns in triple turrets. Then it had 8 150mm in twin turrets, 4 150mm in single turrets, 14 105s in twin turrets, 16 37s in 8 twin turrets, and then 10 20mm in single mountings. And then the last version of them, which of course is one where they realized that AA was very important, once again 9 280s, 8 150s, 4 150s, 14 105s in 7 twin turrets, just like before, 16 37s, and then on the Scharnhorst, 10 20mm and 3 quadruple mounted 20mm, whereas the Gneisenau got 7 quadruple mounted 20mm and 10 once again of the 20mm. So they just got a ton of different AA basically on top of everything. But yeah, these are the standard German battleships of World War II. I definitely think we're going to see them in game at some point. It just really depends when. Then we have not from Tokyo, now we're talking about the IJN Tucao class heavy anti-aircraft ship. Now let's just see if I can find a decent picture of it just to show you guys. This is probably the best one. So these machines, when it comes to the Tucao class, were completely designed to be anti-aircraft, meaning that they had a lot of features, mainly radar, which was designed to detect aircraft from miles away and be able to deal with it. So the Maya was completed in 1930, unlike her sister ships of the same class, Tucao and Atago, was not as extensively rebuilt, although Maya was rebuilt to an unknown extent, so that her stability and top-heavy issues were addressed, and despite this fact, over the course of the war, until her untimely demise in 1944, it could be argued that as opposed to her sister ships, Maya did receive much more attention in the form of her AA department, as well as fighting capacity through greatly improved crew count. So basically, what we have a look at when it comes to these machines, you have different radars which were on board, such as the Type 13 air search radar. It was intended as a ground-based radar and was rushed into service due to its effectiveness, and subsequently also used, apart from its intended ground-based role again, due to its combat effectiveness. So this thing has a pulse width of 10 microseconds, pulse repetition frequency of 500 hertz, and it has a range for aircraft 100 kilometers and a single aircraft 50 kilometers. Then there was the Type 22 general purpose radar. This was also intended for surface radar, and it could range a group of aircraft at 35 kilometers, a single aircraft at 17 kilometers, and a battleship at 24 kilometers. So because of these two sets of radar, they were able to see stuff all the way out to up to a ridiculous amount in the game, 100 kilometers technically. And then there were Type 2 IR-IFF communications equipment transmitters used, and receivers, which were used on the machines as well. Then they had another type of radar, which was on this machine, the Type 21 radar, which would also be able to detect a group of aircraft at 100, a single aircraft at 70, and a battleship at 20 kilometers. So with the Type 21 radar installed, basically what you would have is you would have a machine which was completely designed to see stuff from miles away and be able to use that to its advantage. When we have a look at the general class of this, the Tucao class, what we're having a look at is it has 8 203mm guns, which were modified Type E turrets, so similar to what we already have in game in the form of the heavy cruisers for Japan. Then it had secondary dual-purpose 12 127mm dual-mounted guns. Anti-aircraft weaponry, it had 13 triple-mounted 25s, 27 single-mounted 25s, 36 overall total 13.2mm guns. It had 16 torpedo tubes for Type 93 torpedoes with reloads. So it had 32 things overall, 32 torpedoes overall. It also had depth charges and all of that stuff as well. So a big focus on AA, but still keeping those 8 203mm, which would have made it a hell of a lot of fun, so lovely to see. The last one we're having a look at is from MC205V, and it's talking about the Italians. So the Italians, of course, just added to the game in update 1.99, do have a bunch of other machines that could easily be in the game. They have stuff like the Zara-class heavy cruiser that we see here, which consisted of the Zara, the Flume, the Gorizia, and also the Polar, and these were the most armored heavy cruisers built up to that time and even later. There were very few classes of cruisers which equaled or exceeded the Zara in actual overall protection, and the decision to build the Zara was made as early as 1928 to keep up with the other main naval forces of other nations. And the designers were told that they did not feel bound by the 10,000 ton limit. What has surprise, another nation just not listening to the the Washington Naval Treaty. Or why? What is the point in this treaty if nobody listens to it? Like my God, it's like one of those. It's one of those things. It's like one of those things where everybody just signs something to say, yes, we are in favor of world peace, and then they start bombing everything. Oh, it's so silly. But anyway. So they specified some requirements for this ship to be about 12,000 tons, and it should be noted that from 1931 onwards, for a few years, the Zara, they would have been the most powerful and modern ships in service in the Regia Marina. And as the works of the modern modernization of the battleships, the Giulio and the Doria, had not yet started, nor had the construction of the new battleships been ordered in the form of the Littorio. And the units of the Zara-class combined the main armament typical of most heavy cruisers, so once again 8 203mm cannons in twin towers, an average speed of particularly powerful armor. So it would have a 150mm belt, 20 to 70mm on the bridge, the towers would be 120 to 140, the barbettes 140 to 150, the bulkheads 90 to 120, and the tower 70 to 150. And the basic way of seeing this is this just blows the Trento out of the water. The protection provided for 2 armor bands instead of 1, so therefore it would be way more armored, and a scheme common more to battleships than to most heavy cruisers, giving it enhanced protection. The Zara and the Flume were ordered in September 1928, the Gorizia in October 1929, and the Polar in 1930. And the Zara and the Flume were almost identical in appearance, while the Gorizia had smokestacks with slightly different shapes, and even more marked was the difference in the appearance of the Polar. It's interesting to note that the Zara was the head of the class and was ordered and placed second, and the ordination dates back to the September 27, 1928, 12 days after that of the Flume, and the setting to July the 4th, 1929, while the River had already been set up on April 29th. The 2 ships were launched on the same day, April 27, 1930, and then the Zara exceeded the Twin in the speed of competition, entering service a month and 3 days before the Flume. So the picture that you're looking at right now, this is the Zara, and then what we have here, this is the Flume. And then you can have a look at the Gorizia, if it shows up. Let's have a look. There we go. That's what the Gorizia looks like. And then you have, of course, the Polar, which is this one right here. So you can see 4 ships that could easily be added into the game with slightly different specifications. It would be nice to see, if I'm honest with you, to see this compared to all of the other ones. But anyway, I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. I'd like to thank Ambrosius McClellan, B. Young, Battling Bacon, Blackie, Chris Giltnane, Conte Baraka, Daniel Stanton, Elove Goat, Jay Wilt, Martinez, Trigger Hippie, Universe, Eugens Terry, and also I'm Devilish and Samuel Slick for supporting the channel.